Black Adam and with The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. We talked about before, James Cameron, he sets that bar high. I got to make $2 billion, astronomical number. Whereas I think the one of the big problems here with Dwayne Johnson was the Deadline article, was the, hey, fact, I got off the horn with the finance guys, and we've turned a profit, and everything's great, and God bless the fans. Whatever that tweet was, where he said this movie's a success right before he knew the hammer was going to come down at DC.
I am not arguing any insider knowledge because I don't know, but I think he's done that before.
Okay.
Because he dropped an article in the summer of 2018 in Forbes. It was not mine, but somebody else in Forbes wrote this big buff piece, glowing article about how Skyscraper was actually a hit because it made money overseas, as if it was the first movie ever to gross money outside of North America. Right, and it was the biggest bullshit, what the hell are you selling here nonsense I had ever read. Right. And in retrospect, that's basically what he tried to do with Black Adam.
Yeah, it's funny because we were talking about this where he was laying out with his profitability chart or whatever he had, that list, all these downstream revenue sources that are saving graces for movies that fail at the theater.
Yes.
And so it was a failure at the theater, and then he just was proving it with these numbers, which are also faulty. So it was an insane thing to do.
And because you're dealing with a franchise here, even if it did eventually break even, that doesn't mean the world is, gleefully anticipating Black Adam 2.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely.
Right. A Black Adam 2.
I liked the movie. I thought it was fun, but whatever.
Did you see it in the movie theater?
I did.
The huge difference. I saw it on HBO Max the morning it dropped, and it was someone's fault for sure. But a Black Adam 2, I do think would be, and they know it would be a disaster. It would be a movie that would not make $100 million.
It's only slightly less disingenuous than if Jared Leto started going on social media and saying the world wants Morbius 2 because it was popular on Netflix for a couple days.
Yes, exactly. And I think Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, is in a bit of a spot that I don't think he's been in since he made his career pivot around 2010, went to the Fast and Furious series, sort of like supercharged his career around that time. I think he's had pretty smooth sailing for a while. And this Black Adam DC situation is a ding on him.
It's a huge ding. And in this case, I'd argue the cover-up is worse than the crime.
Yes.
Because it's embarrassing. It's humiliating.
Yes.
And to the extent that, and again, I don't have any skin in the game or whatever, but the extent that he and his agent apparently convinced Henry Cavill to quit The Witcher because Superman was waiting for him, blah 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 blah. I'm sure it's more complicated than that.
Yeah,
right.
But from a narrative point of view, it's like you didn't just screw over your own franchise, you screwed over this other guy who you wanted to be in your movie for your self-serving reasons, and because you had the same representation. Not only did you get him in your movie, and not only did you sabotage that movie by talking endlessly about this cameo that in the real world nobody gave a shit about.
No.
If people wanted Henry Cavill as Superman, Henry Cavill would still be Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And I without getting into the Snyder discourse, I mean, the numbers are the numbers. Batman v Superman is still the most front-loaded movie ever to open above $100 million.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Man of Steel was very front-loaded. Now you can argue it wasn't Henry Cavill's fault, and he's a good actor, he's a charismatic person. As far as I know, he's a decent human being. I don't know, but this wasn't a case of everyone loves Chris Hemsworth as Thor.
Right. He could have been a fine Superman who does 10 Superman movies if the Superman movies he were in were better, but they weren't. And he's been stamped as the Superman in those bad movies people don't like.
If he had swallowed his pride a little bit and been a utility player like Mark Ruffalo has been with the Hulk in the MCU.
Yes.
Where he doesn't necessarily need his own movie, but he shows up as a huge added value element and brings, Superman's in this movie. That's interesting.
Right. So where do we think this goes with The Rock? Because again, this is his biggest L I would say he's had in over a decade. He handled it incredibly poorly. He showed no humility. I think he's had a public backlash that I don't think he's maybe felt since he's left professional wrestling. I don't think he's been booed by a crowd since he was Hollywood Rock back in the 2000s. But I would say he's got to do some soul searching and figure out what his next move is. My big advice is be in something good for once, because
make another snitch, damn it.
Make another snitch. I mean, listen, Clayton and I, the BO Boys, have said on this show, Dave Bautista someday in our lifetime will be nominated for an Academy Award.
Yes.
Mhm.
John Cena is earning raves as the Peacemaker. He's got to look to his fellow pro wrestler turned actor brothers and be in something good with auteurs. Give himself to an auteur director, do some acting, but do something that is genuinely liked. That is our advice. Scott Mendelson, what is your...
I agree with that. I think he also needs to do Jumanji 4, because those were both terrific movies that made an ungodly amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think if you remember Jumanji 3, they set up a terrific cliffhanger where the characters in the game are apparently in the real world now. So now you're going to have the kids as humans interacting with these video game archetypes, which are the actual exaggerated versions in the video game.
Those were the two best movies I would say that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has been in.
I love Rampage. I think Rampage freaking rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon the pun.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually my favorite video game movie.
Okay.
And I think he is very good in these films that are, relatively unpretentious, not trying to set box office records, and don't cost more than 120, 130. So they can be huge hits at 350, $400 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think he needs to do Jumanji. He needs to stop pretending that Red Notice is a great new franchise.
Yeah.
And as you said, he needs to, do a couple supporting roles in other people's movies. I mean, he got so much goodwill from being the supporting character in even bad movies like Be Cool, where he was the best thing in a bad movie.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Or even like Get Smart, where he was basically the best thing in an okay movie that made a lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean, he was
or
great.
He went against type by playing the villain.
He was great in Pain and Gain.
Yes. Yeah. He, in a movie filled with good actors, he was terrific.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the one instance you could point to of The Rock giving himself to, and you may like him or not like him, but Michael Bay is an auteur.
Yeah.
He makes Michael Bay movies that stand out in a way that I think The Rock hires these directors who are basically, his crew. He's trying to do the Adam Sandler thing of you have your directors who make your movies, but Adam Sandler also goes and he does a Safdie Brothers movie and a PTA movie, and he does auteur movies along with having his buddies direct movies that he tells them how to direct them.
Yeah.
And he budgets his movies properly.
I do think Brad Payton is a skilled workman director. I think San Andreas, it's not my favorite movie or anything, but I think that works. And that's another film that cost $110 million that looks a hell of a lot more expensive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he did Rampage. I think that is a interesting, I think it's a good, successful, kid-friendly PG-13 action fantasy that balances the line between being a video game adaptation and being just a bonkers bananas monster, adventure film.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or even something like Hercules, which was sold as a rock vehicle, but it's basically an ensemble.
Right. So, I mean, I think that we've put together a good list of piece of advice for one of the richest men on the planet, which is
be an actor again. You can afford it.
Be an actor. Be more humble about your L's. People like humility.
Because again, I mean, really, the cover-up was worse than the crime.
Yes.
Black Adam was a moderate underperformer that came, had it opened in 2019 and had China gunning on all cylinders, it probably would have crawled to 525 and fine, whatever.
I mean, let's get into it. That box office run that Netflix had with Glass Onion back in Thanksgiving, they put it out for what, 7 days, 600 theaters, and it opened to, did it make 15 million in that run? It was somewhere
Over
around
under.
there. Yeah. So
the only thing it did, and this, not to be conspiratorial, this I believe was the reason they did this. They didn't open the movie in like early November when there wasn't anything opening, or late November to early December when there was nothing opening. They opened it on Thanksgiving weekend when there was a shit ton of other movies opening. I would argue the main reason to do that was to kneecap the competition.
Wow.
The kneecap films like The Fabelmans and Devotion and Strange World that needed theatrical. When they didn't need theatrical, because they're dicks. And again, this isn't good and evil. They're all giant businesses here.
Right.
But
they're all evil, but why pick on the Fabelmans of all? Is it because is this the grudge against Spielberg where he's been the one who said Netflix shouldn't be part of the Oscars? He's one of those auteurs who's never done a Netflix movie.
He argued that the theaters should be playing those films, not that Netflix was bad for not showing them.
Okay. But there has been this Netflix versus Spielberg narrative. So
some of it's fabricated, but yes.
Okay.
And I'm not arguing anything. I don't want to get sued for slander here.
No, of course not.
The thought crossed my mind.
What do you think if Netflix had just released Knives Out 2, Glass Onion to 4,000 theaters, given it let's say even they announced it will be out exclusively for 30 days before it drops on Netflix. Based on the small sample size we saw and the reviews and the audience reactions, I mean, our thought is that movie makes $50 million in that 5-day Thanksgiving window, and easy does 150 million in the first month domestic. I mean, is that fair? Even if
it's front loaded, because you have to imagine that people that don't see it in weekend 3 are just going to wait for Netflix.
Right.
I mean, assuming they put the money behind it in terms of marketing, and they figure out how to market a theatrical release where they have to do more than just put up a billboard in Hollywood and have it on the front page of the Netflix thing on opening day, which, to be fair, gets the job done for Netflix.
Right.
It's like, this movie's dropping and no one's heard of it. There's no marketing. Well, 9 times out of 10, the only marketing they need is a thumbnail on the front page.
Right.
That being said, I could have easily seen it done, 30, 40, $50 million over 5 days, and then letting out to 120 domestic and maybe 250 worldwide, or even 200. But again, and this is where I go to, films like, should Disenchanted be in theaters? Should Hocus Pocus 2 be in theaters, or et cetera, et cetera? You've already made the movie. You've already spent the money on the movie. The only extra money that you would spend is a theatrical marketing campaign. Right. And if you can justify it, then by all means, throw it in theaters. What do you got to lose?
Right. And at this point, we talked before about how people don't watch TV commercials nearly as much. They're not watching the late night talk shows, blah, blah, blah. Could these theatrical marketing campaigns start to, I know you have to spend more to get the same amount of eyeballs you used to, but for a movie like Glass Onion, the biggest drivers are probably going to be people seeing the trailers for 3 months before the movie comes out. So if Netflix just was playing the Glass Onion trailer in a real way in movie theaters, that would be the biggest battle right there. And get the stars to do their interviews with all the publications they need to do interviews with the week leading up to the movie. And maybe don't then spend your $100 million campaign and see what happens. Because I think Glass Onion with just trailers and a real theatrical count probably does those numbers.
Even if that's overly optimistic, and I don't know how I feel about that, what do you got to lose?
Right.
Because again, you've made the movie already.
So why then, in your opinion, why is Netflix, why did it stick to it? It didn't give it, people were hoping, they'll expand the theater count, they'll keep it in longer. How could they turn down what's basically free money? And that's what they did.
The rational reason I can think is that they didn't want the blight of the film getting a full-on theatrical release and underperforming, especially compared to the first Knives Out, where you have a situation where Netflix, king of the world, somehow is crappier at marketing theatrical than Lionsgate.
So they were just scared of their own failings.
Again, I'm not, this is a suspicion, not an accusation.
Right.
The other thing is just they don't give a shit about theaters, and anything that helps theaters doesn't help them.
Right.
And I think that's what Bob, we'll see if different now that Bob Iger's back at Disney, but I think that was Bob Chapek's thinking, that he did not want theaters to be a major part of the Disney ecosystem. And the sooner they go out of business, hey, whatever, now it's all Disney Plus, yippee skippy.
Yeah.
And the only reason he didn't F around with the Marvel movies is because Kevin Feige would have left.
Right. And to me, that maybe, listen, I'm not a CEO, I'm not worth hundreds of millions of dollars yet, but I do think it seems a little strange that a company just wants to get rid of what is historically their biggest revenue stream for their product, which is theatrical. I mean,
you are correct. It's insane. In 2019, Disney made $12 billion in global theatrical revenue. Now, they didn't get all that back because you have, splits, theaters, and studios. But that theatrical success drove below, ancillary, DVD, PVOD, EST, streaming eventually. But what they've done now in the last 2 years is not only have they undercut their theatrical revenue marketplace, they've absolutely decimated the post-theatrical, because everybody knows that anything Disney will eventually be on Disney Plus.
Right.
So there's no incentive to buy a DVD, rent it on digital, or buy it on digital, or rent the Blu-ray, because you wait another month, it'll be on Disney Plus forever.
Yep.
I think it's even crazier now because Wall Street has kind of turned on streaming in a way where they're like, it's not about subscribers, it's about making money, guys. You got to make some money.
What a novel idea.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, how did we not figure that out immediately, that this was all going to collapse like a house of cards? And here's the thing, is that Glass Onion was a budding franchise that had a track record at the box office, and Netflix could have raked in money, and they left money on the table. And like you said, they did kind of give a fuck you to theatrical. And then what really it made me mad was that you had these headlines saying, oh, Glass Onion solves the mystery of getting people to the theaters. And it's like, they cannot benefit from the headlines for box office when they don't care about theatrical. That is just not fair.
They also don't officially release numbers, so you're doing whisper.
Yeah.
And the success of Glass Onion is entirely predicated on the success of Knives Out.
Yes.
What's the secret to getting people back to theaters? Make a sequel to a movie that did well in theaters that people liked. Whoa, Netflix is such a disruptor.
Crack the code.
Right.
And again, Netflix is not good and evil. My issue is as much about how Wall Street treated Netflix as the one ring to rule them all, and they treated them like they were a tech company instead of an entertainment company. And I blame the rest of the industry, which, to be fair, was on some pressure from Wall Street to basically follow them all off the same cliff.
Right. So do you think that anything will change going forward in terms of Netflix's theatrical strategy? Do you think that they will look to their next potential big movie? And I don't know what that's going to be, because Netflix's movies have not been getting better these last few years. I mean, Glass Onion does start to feel like an outlier in terms of a Netflix movie that we think would do box office. But do you think they're going to be more theater friendly going forward, or this is what it is?
I would like to think that they'd start using theaters at least as a glorified marketing tool, as a way to separate the wheat from the chaff. And honestly, I wrote about this back in May 2021. I was hoping that's what they were doing with Army of the Dead, which is a rare Netflix mockbuster that feels like the genuine article.
Right.
I mean, again, without getting into the Zack Snyder discourse, I did see that in a theater, and I'm very glad I did.
Right.
It looks and feels and plays like a real movie.
Right.
And I'm very much looking forward to Rebel Moon.
Yeah.
I mean, him getting to play in the Seven Samurai meets Star Wars sandbox that he almost kind of sort of flirted with doing back in 2013. Awesome.
Yeah, it's
but otherwise, Knives Out, because it was such a theatrical hit, was the biggest Netflix original in terms of, let's see what we can do with theaters. And they didn't take the shot there. I can't imagine there's anything there's no safer bet than a sequel to Knives Out.
I was going to say,
if they didn't do it there, what the hell?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, what was that?
No,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just this was the one, and they didn't do it. So it doesn't make me believe that they have any
Yeah.
plans to change the horse in midstream.
And it's like 20 years ago, if Warner Brothers wasn't willing to use Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman and Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut to fight for the NC-17, then it was never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.